Welcome back, Richard. It's good to see you again to continue our conversation about emotional regulation.
Right, part two of emotional regulation. Once again, we're going to talk about emotional regulation in children, but all of this also applies to adults. We have the same obligation. Um, Last week we made two important foundational statements. One is we want you to think about emotional self-regulation as a developmental ability. Okay, it's a skill that children need to develop. Most children develop it sort of by osmosis, it just sort of emerges. Other children need a little bit of help. The second thing is we want to separate feelings from behaviors. We want to separate how you feel from how you respond, because the teaching that we do addresses the response or the reaction. We can't do anything about the feelings. We can do much about the reaction or the response. So those two sort of foundational statements. Self-regulation is a developmental ability. And second, we have to distinguish between the feeling and the behavior, because what we teach is at the behavioral end.
Right, because as we said, the emotion is oftentimes it just happens. That's something that isn't always completely under our control. We have an emotional response to something that happens, and we can't always control that. Sometimes we can't always control that.
Right.
What we have to learn how to do is how to control our behavioral response to that emotion that we experience. And so that's where I think most people falter when it comes to emotional regulation is they experience the emotion, but then they fail to take steps needed to control the behavioral response to that emotion.
Right. And we want to add one more foundational statement in today's podcast in part two. One is we ask that you not view a lack of self-regulation. What do we mean by lack of self-regulation? It's a temper tantrum. It's a meltdown. It's losing emotional control. We don't view the lack of self-regulation as a misbehavior to punish. Many parents punish their children when they have a temper tantrum or a meltdown. That the lack of self-regulation is not a misbehavior to punish. It's a skill that we have to teach.
Right.
And in the first podcast, in part one, we talked about this emotional reaction, the temper tantrum, the meltdown. Think of that as the feeling itself is sort of a blinking light. And I think of flying an airplane or being on a ship or in a car. You have this blinking light saying something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong. These inappropriate behavioral responses, throwing things, hitting people, having a tantrum, you can break the light and it'll stop blinking.
Right.
You haven't solved the problem.
Right.
Okay. So don't go after the behavior as though it's the problem. It's just a blinking light saying something's wrong.
Right.
I don't have this skill yet. I'm still having temper tantrums. Okay, so honey, that's a skill that we need to develop. Okay,
Right.
not a behavior to punish.
Yeah, because if you think about it, and so just as a quick example, because I think it is important to illustrate this so that people know what we're talking about, because I think that we live in a climate right now where I think people tend to hear things like what you just said, that the lack of self-regulation is not a misbehavior that we need to punish. We need to teach a skill. That is not to say that if you're in a classroom, in a first grade classroom, and a kid gets upset and starts flipping desks and doing all that, that doesn't mean that that kid should not be removed from the class.
Right.
Of course, that kid should be removed from the class because you have 19 other students who need to remain safe and a teacher that needs to remain safe in the classroom. And the kids need to know that that classroom is a safe space.
Right.
So but we don't see that as a punishment per se. We see that as we're removing a threat. We're dealing with dangerous and destructive behaviors, right? We're getting rid getting rid of that or eliminating that space for the kid to potentially harm themselves or harm someone else. So that's when we say that it's not to be punished, we don't mean that there's not a consequence,
Right.
because
Mhm.
there has to be a consequence. But we're not talking about removing that kid from the classroom when he melts down like that is not going to fix the problem. That
Right.
kid still has a skill to learn.
That's right.
That's because you remove him. And Richard, parents, teachers, administrators say this. We remove him from the classroom every time he does it, but then he goes back and he just does it again.
You're breaking the light. All you're doing is you're breaking the light.
That's all you're doing. And so, yeah, you have to get him out of the situation in the moment, but you
Right.
still have to teach the skill.
That's right. And that's what we want you to distinguish. There is a distinction between those two things. Yes, you must respond. Yes, a child throws a toy, okay, and puts a dent in the wall or scratches the wall. Um, yeah, we're not telling you to ignore that. What we're saying is, okay, now you know something is wrong, and you have to have a consequence for that. It's okay. But it also means that this child has not developed this ability yet. And it's like sleeping. You don't punish a child who's having trouble sleeping. You teach them how to sleep. Okay. This is one of those developmental abilities. You don't punish a child well, you shouldn't punish a child for not managing their toileting when they're 2.5 or 3. You teach them how to do it. Okay.
Right,
We want you to view self-regulation the same way.
right,
Yeah, you gotta address the behavior. They can't be throwing stuff. But all that tantrum means is there's a developmental ability that they don't yet possess.
right. Yeah. So we're going to not break the light. We're going to, manage the emergency, manage
Right.
the moment to keep
Mhm.
everybody safe. You use the example of a kid getting angry and putting a hole in the wall or something. Depending on the age of the child, the appropriate consequence to that is the child helps you fix the wall.
Right.
They
Mhm.
have to fix that, and they may lose access to that toy or that device or whatever
Right.
it is
Mhm.
for a period of time. But that's the consequence. That's not again, that's not necessarily a punishment.
It's not a
That's
punishment.
A happens, B has to come following that. You break
Mhm.
something, you have to fix it. You
Right.
misuse something, you don't have access to it. That
Right.
is a natural consequence to something.
Right. But if a 5-year-old is still having temper tantrums, you have work to do. You have some teaching to do. Okay. It
Absolutely.
didn't happen automatically. Now you have some teaching to do, but it's done at that level of the response.
Yeah.
So for starters, and we can run through these very quickly. You have to teach the skill and provide opportunities for them to practice it. We talked about the grocery store. You got to teach them how to behave in a grocery store, and you have to go back so that they can practice that skill.
Right. Yeah, we talk I will sit and talk with parents about real specific, easy ways to do that, and that is you manufacture a reason to go to the store. All right, we need bread. All we're doing is going in and getting bread. That is sometimes that's a 3-minute visit to the store, to the grocery store. But you're doing that 3 minutes and you're getting out without any big problems.
Mhm.
And you go in the next time and just get bread, just get milk this time. And you know what? This time we need to get milk and eggs and bread.
Right.
So we need to
Mhm.
get 3 things, but they're all routed around the same area in the grocery store. So again, now we're instead of a 3-minute visit, we're talking about a 5-minute visit.
Mhm.
Um, but you slowly build it up so that they are able to manage themselves in that situation.
Right.
But those you have to use deliberate practice sessions.
That's
Again,
right.
just like any other skill.
Right. And if you're having a practice session, don't do it when you're thinking
Mhm.
about other things or you're busy if you're going in for a practice session, you need to be focused exclusively on the practice.
Yeah,
Okay.
it
Don't
can't
go
be at
in
the
when
end of a
everybody's
busy day and like
right.
everybody's tired and frustrated and hungry. So let's
Right.
go do this bread thing now. That's not
No.
a good idea.
No. Take a morning and go in and let's have a teaching session. Okay. But get everything else off the radar. Okay. And provide support. It's called scaffolding. So make sure your practice sessions, make sure you're fully prepared, that you're prepared to teach and not really go shopping. Okay.
Hey, Richard, that's the thing, right? Make sure that you're prepared and that the kid is prepared.
Right.
Don't do it when the kid is angry,
Right.
hungry, tired. Don't do it when you're hungry, tired,
Mhm. Mhm.
frustrated. Make sure that everybody is, and it's just to set yourself up for success
Right.
in these initial practice sessions. We
Right.
know that it's not going to be like that every time, but
Mhm.
when you're doing the practice sessions, you have to, have that success.
Right. If you're doing this, go at 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning when the store is quiet and you can focus just on teaching. Okay. So again, you don't avoid the store, you teach behavior in the store. All right. Second, you have to help kids become a little more self-reflective. And how do you do that? Well, first of all, you have to stay calm
Mhm.
and give them time to manage their emotions. Children have the feeling, and at first they're going to react. You have to give them time to work through that initial reaction. In most cases, many kids are going to have the initial reaction and they're going to start to pull themselves back together. It takes them a little time, but you have to remain calm and not react to their tantrum, not react to their behavior immediately. Give them time to work through it, to manage the situation. The best way to do, look, we live in a fast-paced world.
Right.
I mean, we were out the other night. We had two infants, a year old and a 5 month old. And it got real busy real fast. And I could feel myself getting amped up and thinking, how are we going to manage? Calm down. Just calm. You have to stay calm
Mhm.
and replace this highly emotional, fast-paced times of day with reflection and analysis. You've got to keep yourself calm. You have to model self-reflection, self-awareness, and self-regulation. If you're getting worked up, I can tell you what your kids are going to do.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that another piece to this is, the parents verbalizing some of that stuff. Like
Mhm.
now, obviously, you have really young kids in the example you just gave from your life the other day. But as your kids get older, you can say, I think it's great to say, man, I feel like I'm getting really. There's a lot of people in here. I feel like I can feel myself really getting worked up a little bit. Let's just hurry up and get our stuff and go so that so that we can head home and get out of this busy store.
Right.
So verbalizing those things, but also reflect afterwards. When you do these practice sessions, for example, I think it's great to then go back with your kid and, if they did a good job of not asking for something, or they handled themselves pretty well, say, hey, you really seem to handle yourself pretty well in there. Or you didn't, when you asked for some candy and I said that we weren't going to get any candy today, you did a really good job. How do you feel about that?
Mhm.
And parents are going to say, that doesn't feel real. That just feels weird to talk to your kids like that. Kids are used to people talking to them like that, especially once they get in school, that they are talked to like that very often about how they performed on the tests or how they're doing in PE or music or art or whatever. So you can talk to them like that too, teaching them to be self-reflective. Hey, I
Right.
did do a pretty good job in there. Yeah, I
Right.
feel pretty good about that.
Right.
And it puts words to some of those feelings so that then they will do that later on their own.
Right. When children, one of the ways children learn self-regulation is by thinking about what they have heard from
Right.
their parents, and they internalize what their parents, it's called internalized speech. And imagine what effect it would have if you were in a grocery store or any kind of a store, and you can feel that sometimes it's relaxing, sometimes it's very hectic, like there are a lot of people and everything. Imagine the effect it would have on a child if you said, "Sweetheart, there's just too much going on in here. Let's come back another time." Okay,
Mhm.
I'm getting anxious. I'm getting sort of upset. So how about if you and I come back later tonight, or how about if we do this tomorrow morning? That kind of talk kids will internalize rather than you getting worked up and saying, "We have to hurry. You can't do anything. Be quiet. You're in the way." Honey, why don't we just let's leave the store. We'll come back tomorrow morning and do this.
Right.
What an important lesson that is for them. Okay.
Absolutely.
So you have to model what you want them to do.
Mhm.
Okay. What are examples? There are some one homework resistance. What's the missing skill? I mean, rather than getting angry about the homework, what is it that the child isn't doing? And what strategies can you teach the child?
Right.
Maybe your child has to move around while they're doing homework. Try to understand what it is.
Right.
Stop playing the video game. This is a huge problem.
Yeah.
When you ask children, you have to stop playing the video game. What is it that do they need more time to transition? Do they need to have assistance? Do they need a couple more minutes? It's your obligation as a parent to figure out what is the missing skill. I won't even, the two biggest ones are getting ready for school in the morning and getting ready for bed at night.
Yeah.
These are opportunities to teach children the skills they need to manage these very difficult circumstances,
Right.
or there are reasons to punish them for misbehaving.
Right. And I think that I think the first step with all of these things, whether it's homework resistance or transitioning off of video games or getting ready for the morning or evening, I think what we encourage parents to do is break some of those things down. Like
Yeah,
look at what's really happening. A lot of times, just as an example, a lot of times when it comes to video games, the real challenge that some kids have with video games is that they really just don't know when they're going to get to play video games again,
mhm,
right? That because sometimes parents are inconsistent, and it's like some days they can play on it, some days they can't play on it. Kids don't know why. Some days they can, and some days they can't. If kids know that I will get to play it again tomorrow, or they know that they're asking me to get off the game right now because we're going to go eat dinner. But as soon as when I finish eating dinner and do my after dinner stuff, I can get back on it if there's enough time. They're going to transition easier in those circumstances than they will if the parent is inconsistent and the kid just has no idea. I may not be able to play this game again until like 3 days from now. I don't know. And so kids have a hard time with that.
right.
Knowing what's coming next and having some of that consistency is a great way that parents can almost passively manage some of these things.
Right. Yeah, think about it from the child's, not just from your point of view that you want something to be done right now and your child should be obedient. Think about it from the child's point of view. And you're right, they don't know when they're getting it back.
Right.
But if you say to them day after day after day, as soon as we take care of our responsibilities, you have free time.
Right.
Okay. But you have to sit and have dinner and you have to help with the cleanup and you have to do your chores. And as soon as all that's finished, then you get it back. So then they can start to regulate because then they know what's coming.
We use the example of sweets and junk food in the
Yeah.
last podcast, and it's usually the same thing with that.
Mhm.
Kids who I'm going to use the word binge, but I don't mean it as a diagnostic thing, but kids who like don't really control themselves when it comes to eating candy, it's
Right.
usually because um, candy is removed from them, and they may go weeks without getting any. Not that it's a big deal that they can't have candy, but when you reintroduce it they're going to be all in and they're going to want to eat as much as they can because it may be weeks or months before I can have it again.
That's
And so
right.
teaching kids how to appropriately use it,
Hmm.
how to appropriately consume,
Right.
sweets or junk food, or how to
Mhm.
appropriately consume video games, or
Right.
how to manage homework. Homework sometimes is just so overwhelming because they have so many things to do that they can't structure it in their brain on how to handle it. And so just making it easier for them by making it predictable, making it consistent, and
Mhm.
then they know what to expect, and it just removes a lot of that uncertainty.
Right. Yeah, teach them how rather than doing it for them.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So in the first part in part one, we talked about some kids don't develop this ability on their own. They need a little bit of help to develop it. And so we want to talk a little bit about why do some kids struggle with
Mhm.
self-regulation? Some seem to develop it okay. Well, one reason is basic temperament. You all know about temperament. It's our inborn, sort of biologically based behavioral or emotional tendencies. It includes things like what is your activity level? How do you react emotionally? Can you adapt to changes? What is your mood? What is the intensity of your reactions? All these things are sort of your basic temperament, and it influences how we react to the world. So if your child has a difficult temperament, it's going to take a little more work. Some kids do. Some
Right.
kids have a very easy temperament. Yeah, we often talk to parents and they have two children, and one child just seems to go with the flow and
Mhm.
everything's okay, and the other child is very resistant. That's you're looking at different temperaments, and you have to deal with your child's temperament.
Well, and what's remarkable, I still think it's remarkable, even though we see it, have seen it so often, is parents, those same parents will say, and they've been like this since the time we brought them home from the hospital.
She was like this in utero.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's just always been like that. And
Right.
so that's when you said that it's inborn biologically based, we see some of those temperamental differences from birth. And as we as a person develops, as a
Right.
person ages and matures, that temperament starts to shape and form what we later will then refer to as their personality. And
Right.
sometimes their personality also influences their emotional regulation. When emotional regulation is completely dysregulated and
Mhm.
the person is reaching adulthood and they can't manage their emotions, we have a group of mental health conditions, disorders referred to as personality disorders, and most
Right.
of them are in regard to emotional regulation. At least the cluster B disorders are related to emotional regulation.
Right. That's right. And personality is nothing more than temperament combined with environment.
Right,
And so if you have a child with a difficult temperament growing up in a chaotic household,
right,
that's going to affect their personality. If you have a difficult temperament in a calm, organized household, that could affect the personality in a positive way. Okay.
right.
So personality is the combination of temperament with environment. In part one, we also talked about kids who have neurodevelopmental disorders such as autism or ADHD, depression, anxiety. Anytime you get any one of these disorders of impulse control or the inability to control your emotions, that makes it a little more difficult.
Mhm.
Okay, kids with ADHD, for example, are don't have a lot of inhibition. They don't have good impulse control, so they need assistance. Okay.
Hmm. Right. And a lot of those things that we talked about so far are related to the child, but then there are
Mhm.
parental things. We've talked many times on the podcast about parenting styles, parenting practices, but parents, the way in which you respond to your child, especially the way in which you respond to your child's temperament, the way
Right.
you respond to their responses, um, the way in which we trigger our kids. All of those things influence the child's development of these skills as well. I'm reading a book right now about raising mentally strong kids. And
Right.
in the book, they talk about one of the most challenging parenting styles that we don't really talk about as being a very challenging parenting style is the passive parent, the parent
Right.
who, sort of lets the kid just do and isn't overly engaged. They may be loving, they may be nurturing and things like that, but there's not a lot of direction, there's not a lot of redirection, there's not a lot of management from the parent. That is really tough for a kid growing up because if they don't have that guidance and that structure that they need,
Mhm.
they don't know how to pull things together and manage it themselves. And
Right.
so, your parenting style and the way in which you manage your kid and their environment and everything can have a significant influence on their behavior.
Yeah, if your major response and your emphasis is on punishing and providing consequences for their tantrums, you're missing the teaching opportunity. Okay, so that's why we keep saying you can't just punish, you also have to do some teaching. The other thing we want to mention before we leave this part is there are many parents, sometimes parents will give in
Mhm.
to their child and just say, this isn't worth it. I don't have the energy. I don't have the time. They just give in and say, here, have the switch, have the candy. I don't care. Or the parent does all the work to soothe the child. The child's having a tantrum and you're just soothing and holding and comforting. And you're not teaching anything. Okay. So be careful with ignoring it or overdoing it. Your children will give, in business, we talk about I'm going to give you my monkey. The monkey's on my back. Okay. So I'm going to give you my monkey. I'm going to give you my problem.
Mhm.
Don't accept your children will give you that responsibility. They'll let you do all the soothing. They'll let you ignore. Don't accept that. It is their skill to develop. You can't accept their toileting. You can't accept their toothbrush. You can't accept they have to learn how to do this themselves. So make sure that they feel the responsibility to do this.
Right. Because the other thing that's happening while you're not teaching a skill, what
Mhm.
the child also learns from that is that they will learn that they're not capable of managing it.
Mhm.
The underlying message is, I know you can't do it yourself, so come and let me help you with that. And that's teaching the child. Sometimes I can go in the direction of learned helplessness to where
Yeah,
the child never gains those skills because they just don't believe that they have them. Or
right.
it can lead to, you know what, I can just behave however I want to, and somebody else is going to calm me down and fix the problem, so I can just do what I want.
That's right.
It can go in a couple of different directions there, but the bottom line is neither is a healthy direction. So we need
That's right. That's right. That
to.
I don't have to worry about it. I don't because my mother will take care of it or my parents will take care of it. They'll take it. No, no, no. It's your responsibility to develop it.
Absolutely.
There are times when more is needed. The parents, you'll reach a point where you say, I just need a little bit of help here because I know what I need to do, but it's not working, and so I need to get some help. You can teach mind things like mindfulness and meditation. If you're doing those things yourself, you can teach your child how to do those things. But there is a method, it's called dialectical behavioral therapy, which is designed to teach distress tolerance and emotional regulation. Not everybody can do DBT. It's a relatively recent arrival on the scene, but it's pretty effective with kids who struggle with emotional regulation because it teaches them how to tolerate stress. So that's managing their feelings, but also how to regulate your emotions, what you can do instead of having a tantrum or a meltdown.
Right. Absolutely. So as we kind of wrap up this two-part series, we want you to remember the key points of, emotional regulation is a developmental skill. It's not bad behavior that you need to punish. It's not that your kid is a bad person or
Right.
is destined for, criminality or anything like that.
Yeah.
It is a developmental ability, and we need to focus on how to develop that skill as early as possible.
Right.
Most kids learn it automatically just from living their daily life. Other kids have to be taught specific skills. It's just like anything else. Any other developmental skill, you do the same thing. If they're not learning it on their own, we have to teach it.
Right. Mhm.
Also, you know, if your home is chaotic, um, everything's going to be chaotic. Your kid's going to be chaotic. Their emotional response to things are going to be chaotic. So, keeping that structure and that organization and that predictability and consistency is so important
Mhm.
because then the child knows what to expect and
Right.
they can manage their emotions better.
Mhm.
Imagine if you're upset or if you get hurt, and sometimes mom comes and helps you when you're hurt, and sometimes she doesn't. You don't know
Right.
which one. What are you going to do? Like, how are you going to respond to that? I,
Right.
I think it's having that predictability, having the situation where your kid knows what's going to happen. There is no better foundation that your kid needs for learning self-regulation than that.
Yeah, it's hard to learn self-regulation in a chaotic environment. That's
Right.
why we say if you go to the grocery store, don't do it when everybody's tired and hungry and irritated at the end of the day. Let, if your house is chaotic, um, it's likely that everything's going to be chaotic, including you and the children.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you have to model what you want. If
Right.
if you're calm, if you're using that language of self-regulation, if you're staying calm, it's more likely that your children and your partner will stay calm.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as you said at the very beginning of the first episode, and I think you said at the beginning of this episode as well, all of this stuff that we're talking about with kids applies to adults as well.
That's
You know,
right.
The things that your kid needs to do to learn self-regulation skills, if you're having a hard time or your partner is having a hard time managing their emotions or regulating their behavioral response to things, the same things are needed. You have to go through some of the same things. It'll be much more difficult for an
Right.
adult to learn some of those things, but it's the same process.
Same thing.
You
Right.
just have to be intentional about it.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
Well, with that, I think that that is it for today. This is certainly a topic that we will continue to discuss over time because it's so important. But
Right.
until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.